So here's the thing. About 30,000 years ago, there was an 8-year-old kid who climbed up onto a rock ledge at the edge of his world. Not the edge of a map. I mean, there were no maps. Just the edge of everywhere he'd ever been. His whole life, he'd known maybe 20 faces. His dad, his mom, his brothers and sisters. The adults who sat around the fire at night, whose voices he could pick out in the dark, whose footsteps he knew without even looking. That was it. That was literally the whole world. 20 people, 20 faces, everything else, the forest, the valley, the hills past the stream, was just out there, unknown, not explored, not named, not safe. He'd never had a reason to wonder what was on the other side of that valley. Until that afternoon, when something moved at the tree line, and he realized it was walking toward him on 2 legs. He froze. Every instinct he had was screaming, "That is not one of yours." The shape was right. Upright, 2 arms, moving the way a person moves. But the face was wrong. The clothing was wrong. Even the way it carried itself through the grass was slightly off, you know? The way you can just tell, from a distance, that someone is not from where you are. The kid had never had a word for what he was looking at. He turned and ran. Now, you're probably thinking what happened next was violence. That's kind of the story we've been told about early humans, right? Brutal, territorial, kill first and ask questions never. And honestly, that makes a certain kind of sense on the surface. Small group, scarce resources, no shared language, no reason to trust anyone outside your circle. The logical move is to grab your spear. And that's exactly what the guys in camp did. They stood up, they picked up their weapons, every adult shifted into high alert in like 2 seconds flat, because that's how fast your threat detection system runs when it needs to. But here's the part nobody really talks about. The stranger stopped. He didn't charge. He didn't run. He just stood there, way out there at a distance, and waited. And eventually, think about what this actually took. The boy's father slowly put his spear down. So there's this British anthropologist named Robin Dunbar who spent years trying to figure out why human social groups have a natural ceiling. And he found it, around 150 people. That's the number your brain can realistically keep track of. Know their face, know their deal, know whether to trust them. Beyond that, it starts to fall apart. And it's not a culture thing, you know? It's a wiring thing. The neocortex, the part of your brain that handles all the complex social stuff, can only hold so much. For most of human prehistory, you literally lived your entire life inside that number. The people you knew were the people who existed, as far as your brain was concerned. Anyone outside that circle wasn't just a stranger. They were something your brain had absolutely no category for, which means that kid standing on that rock ledge wasn't just seeing an unfamiliar face. He was seeing something his whole nervous system had never been asked to process before. Not a predator, not prey, not one of his people. Something in between. And that in-between space is genuinely one of the most dangerous places a human brain can find itself, because it's got to make a call without any of the data it normally runs on. Is this thing a threat? Is it like me? Can I read what it wants from its face, its posture, the way it's holding that spear? Every single one of those questions is getting answered in milliseconds by a brain that's going as fast as it possibly can on information it has flat out never seen before. Here's what I find kind of wild about it, though. There's a moment in that kind of encounter where the brain has to do something it almost never has to do. Hold off. Don't decide yet. Just wait. And that is genuinely hard, because the threat detection system is built for speed, not patience. It'd rather throw you a false positive. Treat a safe thing as dangerous than a false negative. Better to freak out at a deer than stay calm for a predator. But the stranger was neither. He was something the brain had no existing file for. And somehow, both sides managed to hold that pause long enough to find out. Archaeologists have actually found evidence of exactly this kind of thing in the fossil record. At sites across Europe and Central Asia from around this period, they've found tools and shells that could only have come from groups living hundreds of miles apart. Traded. Somehow. Across distances that required multiple encounters between total strangers. Somebody had to be the first one to put the spear down. That moment, the moment a stranger became a person, is honestly one of the most important turning points in human history. Not a battle, not a conquest. Just two groups of people deciding, against every instinct they had, to see what happened if they didn't go at each other. And here's where it gets personal, because that same calculation, it's running in your head right now, today, in situations that feel nothing like standing in a prehistoric valley. Every time you walk into a room full of people you don't know, your brain's doing a version of exactly what those adults did. Scanning, categorizing, reading body language, clocking posture, deciding in a few seconds who feels okay and who doesn't. You're not doing this on purpose. It happens before you've even had time to think about it. The guy at the party you immediately felt comfortable around, even though you'd never met him. Your brain had already read like a dozen little signals and filed him as non-threatening before you even said hey. The person who gave you a weird vibe in the elevator. Same thing, totally opposite result. You didn't decide to feel that way. Your neocortex ran the scan and handed you the answer. And look, here's the uncomfortable part. Most of the time, you don't put the spear down. You get that weird feeling and you go with it. You drift to the other side of the elevator. You keep your headphones in. You file the stranger under unknown, skip it, and move on with your day, which is honestly a completely reasonable thing to do. You're running the same software the boy's father was running, just with way more inputs and way less actual physical danger. But every once in a while, not often, just every once in a while, the read comes back inconclusive. And that's the moment that matters. Because here's the difference between you and that kid on the rock. You've got 30,000 years of accumulated human history on your side. You live in a world where strangers have categories. Neighbor, coworker, guy at the coffee shop, person on the subway. Your brain has a framework for this. His didn't. He was seeing the whole concept of a stranger for maybe the first time ever, with zero template for what it meant. And he still had to figure out, in real time, whether the thing coming across that valley was going to kill his family or trade with them. No wonder he ran back to camp. Honestly, that was the right call. The man from across the valley stood there for a long time. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. And then the boy's father, slowly, set his spear on the ground. Nobody told him to do that. There was no rule book, no protocol, no precedent. He just read it. The stranger's posture, the way he'd stopped and waited, the fact that he hadn't raised his own weapon. And he made a call, a guess. An act of trust so huge, it's genuinely hard to wrap your head around, because if he read it wrong, that was it. No second chances out there. We don't know what happened next. We never will. But the fact that you're here, the fact that any of us are here, means enough of those moments went the right way. Enough people, in enough valleys, looked at a stranger and chose to see a person instead of a threat. The boy's father put his spear down without knowing what was going to happen next. That's the whole story, really. The question is just whether you recognize it. Because you've been in that valley too. Maybe not with a spear, but with something you were holding on to pretty tight. And somewhere on the other side, there was someone standing there, waiting to see what you'd do, waiting to find out if you were going to put it down.